Hello, welcome. We're going to give people a little bit more time to roll on in. I am your host for today, Eva Shockey, and I am with SE Thrive. We do have a guest speaker, Christian Jackson, and I'll tell
Hey.
you a little bit about her and why she's here today. SE Thrives leads South Carolinians to stability by providing innovative and efficient access to quality of life resources. Basically, what does that mean? Why is that important? We help people in crisis connect to agencies and nonprofits that can assist them in getting the services and the resources that they need. So we help people right where they are get the services that they need and help them to sustainability. So, welcome to our forum today, Christian Jackson. She's an LPC, a CACI, an NCC, and is medical. Don't laugh at me. I tried to get all the acronyms together.
There are just so many letters. I feel so obnoxious, but it is what it
No,
is.
it's your credentials.
Yeah.
Like for you to be a trusted source, you have to have credentials.
Yeah, it's a lot of
So
training,
thank
folks.
you for getting the credentials you needed to tell us about mental health today. She is
Mhm.
also a mental health counselor in Columbia, South Carolina. Welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm excited today because we get to tap into that CAC, that certified addictions counselor. I don't really use it anymore in private practice, but that is where I started my career, which is at LRADAC, which is the Lexington Richland Alcohol and Drug Abuse Council. So both Lexington and Richland counties have level one services all the way up to intensive outpatient, which we'll talk about, that later. But that's where I started my career, and so I don't really get to treat addiction the way that I used to. So I'm excited about the conversation. I had to brush up on some things, so I'm excited to show y'all what I remember.
Great.
Yeah,
And it's still relevant.
it is absolutely. Hmm.
So, addiction. What does Webster say addiction is? Addiction is defined as the following. It's defined as a person is using a substance or repeatedly repeating behavior in which causes harm in one or more areas of life, including physical wellness, emotional wellness, psychological wellness, and occupational wellness. So, Christian, what's the definition that you have for addiction?
Yeah, I tried to drill it down as simply as I could so we have a easy reference for today. I was trained on the medical model or the disease model of addiction. So the way that I see addiction is as a chronic brain condition. So the chemicals and the substances that people use are and that they will increase the amount of dopamine, which is that pleasure hormone that people have, that we all have in our brains. So, for example, if I am eating my candy corn, right, like I'll have like a shot of dopamine, and it's like, okay, Christian, keep that in rotation. That's your favorite snack. Let's get it, right? But if I'm using crack cocaine, then the dopamine levels, because of the carcinogens and the chemicals in the substance, it's going to shoot it up even higher to the point where it is significant enough that if someone is becoming dependent, physically dependent on the substance, they're going to seek the substance eventually over even food and water. Because the bottom line with the disease model is that the chemistry in the brain is literally altering to seek the substance. And of course, that's going to have a myriad of implications across one's biological makeup. And so it's going to do things like really impact one's impulse control, because there's a piece of the brain that monitors that as far as how quickly someone thinks, whether their frontal lobe is wet, as they would say, if someone excessively uses alcohol. It can be fatal if it's not addressed. And so, if we're looking at it from that medical model, that piece where we know that it directly affects the body physically, and there's a literal change in the hormones and the way that we react, then that's the model that I'm trained on and how I look at things. And it's kind of a catch-22. We got to think about tolerance versus withdrawal, which are two of the different symptoms of substance use disorders when we're diagnosing per the DSM 5. which is that book that we use to diagnose mental health and substance use disorders. If one is using excessively enough and long enough, then the catch 22 comes in where eventually your brain is going to, or your body's going to crave whatever the substance is. So, hence the withdrawal. If I don't have the alcohol or whatever in my system, then I'm going to be looking for it. Your body is physically going to be asking, like, where is my substance? And it eventually and sadly becomes like one's medicine because I don't have it. So, I've never met someone in recovery who wants to use. Eventually, they're wanting to do it, or because they physically need to, and that's that really fine line. And unfortunately, I don't want to say the point of no return, but it's definitely really far into one's addiction.
Okay. Like many diseases, it can take several attempts at treatment to find the right approach.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding the brain's role of addiction can help break the stigma surrounding this illness and encourage individuals to seek help. Addiction does not occur because of moral weakness or a lack of willpower or unwillingness to stop, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
This finding stems from decades of work and investigation that investigates the effect of substances use on the brain.
Mm-hmm.
The brain changes from chronic drug or alcohol use can persist years after the person quits. This is why individuals risk relapse even after long periods of drug abstinence or
Mm-hmm.
alcohol abstinence. And
Mm-hmm.
despite potential devastating effects, more importantly, this is why treatment depends on the type of drug and the individual characteristics of a person.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you take away the stigma
Mm-hmm.
of being a person using drugs or a substance use abuser
Mm-hmm.
or an addict? How do you take the stigma away?
I think what you guys are doing here at SC Thrive, having these conversations is important, first of all, because that educational piece takes away the power of the unknown, which can be really scary for people. And I think that kind of like what we were just talking about, the disease model of addiction that I was trained on, um, I think if people start to look at it from that angle, then you're looking at it like you may look at diabetes, right? Like, if someone has cancer, you don't say, hey, well, if someone's in remission or their cancer comes back, like an addict would come back and say, well, I relapsed or I had a reoccurrence. You wouldn't say to a cancer patient, like, what's wrong with you? Like, why did your cancer come back? So if we think about it like someone who's in remission from cancer or has issues with their diabetes and really try to look at it from that perspective, then I think that would help decrease the stigma. The education that we're providing even here today and trying to understand what that looks like. Again, I don't know anyone in recovery who wants to use. And so it's a lot of different perspectives and things that contribute to one's addiction in the first place. So I think having those conversations and really breaking that down is important.
Do you think that the language that people use around individuals can change also with the stigma? Because
Can the
like
language change?
you
Okay.
like people will say, oh well, that's the neighbor that used to use drugs, or that's the neighbor who used to be a crackhead. If we change the language that we use to describe individuals
Mm-hmm.
with just, oh, that's Johnny, my next door neighbor, not
Mm-hmm.
telling his history.
Mm-hmm.
Like I read yesterday that when you inhale the future and you exhale the past. So if we let the past go
Mm-hmm.
and introducing people and
Mm-hmm.
just name, and he's my next door neighbor. That's how come I know.
Yep.
Not putting in the past. Because some people are trying to let the past go and move forward. But
Mm-hmm.
if we keep putting a name on them, oh, they used to be a crackhead.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think by changing the language to describe somebody, that might help with the stigma too?
Yeah, and I giggle a little bit because I was thinking exactly that, and I'm glad you used that word, crackhead, because we're not saying they're people in recovery or we're being harsh and very mean and shameful in our language to other people who are just sick, right? So that verbiage comes up when we were talking about people in recovery as well, and I personally feel a way about the word addict even. It just sounds like it has a negative connotation. That's just me. That's why I continue to use people in recovery from alcohol and drug addiction. You know, you could be in recovery from a lot of things, but if we're looking at it again from that space of being empathetic and sensitive, and not putting a name or a label on anyone, like you're saying, we're contributing to them trying to perpetuate past their issues and not having them stuck. I do think the language does, it definitely matters because we are more than the things that we've been through. And that's what I talk to a lot of my clients about. So I definitely agree.
So for many Americans and individuals abroad, the
Mhm.
end of the year brings images of happy families. You know, if anybody pays attention to TV now, you see those new car ads and
Yeah.
those new shoe ads, and
Mhm.
everything's happy go lucky. They got the big dinner table with the big turkey, the Christmas tree, the stuffing, holiday music in the background with a cozy fireplace.
Right.
That's the image.
Mhm.
But for other people, the holidays can be much darker and
Mhm.
more of a difficult time, a time of family conflict, financial strain, especially this year,
Yeah.
2020 COVID,
Yeah.
loneliness, grief. The loneliness is big now because they're being they're being isolated,
Yeah.
and the grief. We've lost more people this year than I think we've lost any time before the Spanish flu.
Mhm.
And seasonal affective disorder.
Mhm.
Seasonal affective disorder. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because it's um I was going to say on my couch, but I'm doing virtual telehealth now. But a lot of my conversation with, I would say a good 75% of my clients is, oh, it's the holidays and this sucks. It's not even that it started this month in December or a couple weeks ago for Thanksgiving. It is it's been happening since probably end of October, November. And that is where people's seasonal affective disorder, SAD, would kick in way before the holidays. And so this is a mental health diagnosis that runs from, like I said, like mid-October, um, that late fall season through March. And really, the simplest way to put it is that that's just an increase of one's um, major depression symptoms. So if someone is already diagnosed with with a major depressive disorder, their symptoms would likely increase around that time, um, mainly before for a lot of the reasons you've already said. But we also have people who literally are fine the rest of the year, and bam, this time comes, and that's the major distinction between MDD and SAD. And so a lot of it is everything from feeling really sad most of the day, all day, losing interest in things you used to like to do, sleeping too much, not being able to concentrate, not interacting with people the way you used to, all the way to suicide ideation, somewhere on that spectrum. That is going to be exacerbated, of course, during the holiday season because you're thinking anniversaries of deaths or if someone lost anybody, whether it be a relationship and not necessarily to death, then this could be the first holiday without that person. It's a lot of different factors that go into what seasonal affective disorder is and its triggers.
What impact does SAD have on a person that already has a substance abuse disorder? Could it cause them to go to a recovery? Could it cause them like to isolate
Mhm.
and relapse?
Yeah, this is what we would call in keeping with the medical model theme, the disease model of addiction. It's what we would call a comorbid condition where you're considering mental health diagnosis along with the physical health diagnosis. So your depression, mental health, and the substance use, which is the medical piece. And so it's they're going to play off one another, and we cannot separate them, which is why I'm really thankful that the field is starting to see that we are treating these conditions simultaneously. And so one of the major things that I think is important for people to know is that if someone is using alcohol, which is a depressant, then depression symptoms are likely going to skyrocket. And then they may use just because of them being triggered by trauma, right? So like there's a lot of our body remembers what happens to us in these traumatic experiences, and so even if we cognitively don't remember certain things, because a lot of what I'll hear from people who are clinically depressed and are dealing with SAD and AOD issues, it's a lot of I don't know why I'm so sad. I don't know. I'm just sad. I just am. It just happens every time during the year. It doesn't really matter. It just is what it is. And they accept that. And to answer your question, it definitely will increase the likelihood that someone would use whatever the substance is. Because if you don't want to feel like crap, then I mean, you go take a shot. You already know and you've learned that is one of the fastest ways to feel different. It's a mood altering substance, right? So that's the whole point of the use in the first place. So for sure, if someone is not adamantly doing their work on SAD and or their AOD diagnosis, if they're in recovery, then there's a high likelihood that they would increase their use and have a reoccurrence of use. It's tricky.
It sounds tricky.
It is.
The holidays comes with their own set of stresses, expectation for the person in recovery. It could even impact their work schedule. They could have an augmented work schedule. And here with COVID-19 in 2020, everybody have experienced augmentation in endless work, whether it's the stresses of how do I navigate buying gifts, wearing a mask, having to put on a coat, and I was hot before the mask. Now I'm buying gifts with the mask and the coat on.
Yeah.
And I can't bring the whole family. I can just go out. So how do I not get COVID while doing everything else I'm supposed to do while wearing a mask? Do I really want to do that? Do I want to shop online? The life has changed drastically. Yeah. So it can be scary and dangerous for an addict, but it doesn't have to be.
Right.
There's a director of the Jewish Community Services, Jonathan Katz, that states that families also must face the possibility that an addict does not want to be in attendance at holiday functions because he or she finds the experience too painful. In that case, the best course of action may be to reach a mutual agreement to maybe set up a smaller family dinner after the holidays, or it just might be FaceTime them on the holidays just to check in, say hi, how you doing, laugh about old times, and that might bring the stress level down. And look out for teens and adolescents.
Oh yeah, this is a good question. I think one of the major things for not just your adolescents, but for anyone is to check, remember what you know about your kids, right? Like if you're active and engaged, you know their personalities, then you know when something is off, when they are behaving out of whack from their baseline, right? And so the baseline meaning, and I hate to use the word normal, but just for the sake of the conversation to move past this, normal, are you acting normal, right? For you, right? Like Eva, your normal is different than Sally's, different than mine. So if you notice that your teenager is, I think, a little more skittish, a little more irritable than usual, then that's a perfect conversation to ask them at least what's different with them. Like, what is it that they're anxious about? Really validating for them that they have something going on. Because one of my pet peeves when I was working at Laredac with the adolescents who would be on the hall that I would do groups and stuff for was their family members dismissed and totally invalidated what they had going on. So when I asked the adolescent why they were using, some of it really was because I'm stressed out. This is what I see mama doing, so I'm gonna do it too. So do you notice that there are stressors surrounding your kid? And especially like you said, here in 2020, there are so many things happening where a kid has been ripped from their peers, for a lot of these children and these adolescents, they have been there's been an increase in symptoms of anxiety and depression because of the fact that the school, they didn't realize that at the time probably, but it was a safe haven from the stress at home. And so now they don't have that. Having those open conversations, I think, will likely, continue to build that communication and rapport so that they can most likely see that it's okay to tell mom that maybe I was thinking about it. I'm not sure. I think the bottom line is you would know the up and down, how they may stray from their baseline. When I'm diagnosing people with substance use disorders, I think the most relevant to a teenager, there are 11 criteria, I believe. The most relevant criteria for them would be if they are losing interest in the things that they used to like to do to go use instead. If you know their behavior is like totally left when normally they'll be playing video games, but they decide to stay in their room and they're super down. It could be depression again, and or that core morbid condition of being using something. And it really doesn't have to be that they're stealing your cigarettes or anything like that, or taking your weed or your pills or having access to it. It literally could be huffing glue, which is another thing that I saw that teenagers did because they're going to look for something that is accessible to them. So the cleaning supplies that we are all using, and if we can find it, we have it in our house because of COVID. I mean, check your Lysol cans. You know what I'm saying? Like, are they full? Are they empty? Because I'm more than usual. Little things like that. But it's going to start with really just cutting out the guessing game and having the open line of communication for sure.
How do you know when a person's habit is turning into a problem? Like in this picture, we see everybody with a wine glass, and not
Mhm.
necessarily in this picture, hypothetically speaking, is, let's pick on grandpa because he's getting his cup refilled. This could be grandpa's third glass of wine.
It could be.
But we know that grandpa drinks 3 glasses of wine every sitting.
Hmm.
But every sitting turns into, okay, grandpa, you've had 3 glasses, let's cut
Hmm.
it off. Or he wants one more glass just to get him to sleep.
Hmm. Hmm.
How do we know when that habit has turned into a problem?
I think you just said it. Like if we know grandpa is saying I need this to go to sleep, then you might need to check that out. And how big are his drinks? I think we're going to talk about this later, but that those binging levels are important to keep in mind too. Like what is a standard drink? How much is someone drinking at one point or at one time? Checking the
So what is the psychological effects, and how does it look like of a substance abuser?
hmm really, it depends on the substance one uses. So you alluded to this earlier. The different substances are going to do different things. So alcohol is a depressant. So that is going to obviously kind of bring someone down. Again, going back to that idea of what is one's baseline. How do they usually act? And so if they're sleeping more these days, they're kind of sluggish or lethargic, I would always ask somebody, what you sipping on lately? What you have going on. It's more effective to be direct. Um, Stimulants or uppers, as one would call it, like your Adderall, or even someone trying to manage their weight loss using stimulants to do that. That would suppress their appetite. We're looking at changes like that. Like, the reason I would ask on the assessment is about your eating and sleeping habits is because we know that the psychological effect, the irritability, because I'm not sleeping as much or eating as much, I'm hungry, but I don't really want to eat, my appetite's out of whack. All those little things are small clues to someone using something that they may need to address. Because again, we're talking about substances, but I want to also point out there's the illicit substances, meaning, I'm going to buy this crack off the street, get my weed, my ganja, whatever it is. But then there's also your oxy that your doctor prescribes. Like you can have prescriptions for these drugs too. And so depending on these uses, it's trial and error for the doctor, to be quite honest. They're going to start you on something and then see if it works, tell you to go home and see how you feel and call me if it don't work. So it's those psychological changes. It could be a lot for the body to adjust to. Again, going back to the disease model, exactly what we were saying about it being a chronic like disease. It's all going to affect the chemistry and the biology of your brain. And so that's going to affect your mood because your brain houses the limbic system where we process our emotions and our impulse control, like we talked about earlier. So it's going to depend on what that person uses. And again, going back to their erratic states, are they manic, sleep patterns changing, all those kinds of things.
So recognizing the potential stresses of the holiday and
Mhm.
taking the steps to avoid or mitigate them is a way to navigate through the pitfalls of December, not just December, but pretty much of this whole entire year.
Yeah.
Um, but it can be done, especially when backed by comprehensive addiction treatment. What are some things that someone can do to prepare for the holidays? Like,
Mhm.
can you tell us what, in general, everybody needs to do, and then what an addict needs to do?
Mhm. Um, Preparing for the holidays, I would say the first thing that everybody needs to do is set a boundary. And that can mean many things: physical boundaries, emotional boundaries, financial boundaries. Okay. Like COVID hit everybody's pockets, and I'm not trying to be out here spending all this money. My family already knows we are just thankful to be alive and safe and healthy. So that's going to be important, is setting a boundary, because that's going to inform what you want to do, who you're going to be around, and all those things. I'm working with a client now who is setting those boundaries, and she's getting pushback from her family. But she's like, "Y'all don't wear masks. I'm not about to mess with that." So I'm not trying to have my family susceptible to that. I love you. We will Zoom. So you plan on how you want the holiday to look and expect that you're going to get some kind of pushback from your family. So kind of preparing yourself for that. I think that for someone in recovery, it's going to be important for you to do that as well. But there's going to be a little bit more work for someone who is in recovery, because you know that you would likely drink maybe more. You're going to have your eggnog possibly during this time of the year. So what are your triggers? And so a lot of the work that I'll do with someone in recovery is a functional analysis, and we'll spend probably a couple of weeks, a few weeks really breaking down the triggers, because for the most part, some people have been drinking and using drugs for so long they don't even realize or know why they started using, because it was 20, 30 years ago. So you really have to sit down and differentiate between an internal trigger. So that would be, how am I feeling right before I use? What am I thinking right before I use? What time of day is it? What is my body physically feeling before I want to use? To external triggers. And so that would be, who am I around? Again, going back to that boundary piece, if you're seeing a pattern of a crowd that you're hanging around and you know that they're going to be using, then setting that boundary with those people. So a preparation could literally be, and I do these what we call safety plans in my sessions. You know that so and so is going to be there. How are you going to handle this? Are you going to have your stress ball? Are you going to take a buddy with you? Are you going to kind of check in? Like my phone, my watch will remind me to breathe every so often throughout the day. Do I need to increase that so I know that I'm taking care of myself? It's going to be based on what you need. And so it's really important for someone in recovery to do that, because routines and are um, very powerful in one's addiction, just because it's very ritualistic. And so it's a lot of literally creating new brain waves and indentions in these processes when you're doing this kind of stuff.
And I believe that everything has to be intentional now. And
Mm-hmm.
if you know, like, once Uncle John gets to his fourth drink, he get a little tipsy, and you're in recovery, and you know he gonna come over to you.
Mm-hmm.
You exit before he get to that first first drink.
Yeah.
Just make it known at 9 o'clock. I have to go. I have an Uber scheduled, and 9 o'clock is my time. I have to go. I'm sorry, I can't spend more time with you,
Mm-hmm.
but we can Zoom the rest of the night.
Yeah. And
That's
there's a lot of guilt and shame with that too, for people having to make announcements or feel like they have to leave like that. So I'm here to say, for anyone who knows someone in recovery, or if you're in recovery yourself, making those announcements and saying no to people is saying yes to you and prioritizing your own health. We carry that shame a lot when we do things that are abnormal, and it's going to feel different, but it's still, that's a good point. It's really important for you to consider those things.
so. we talked about the drink versus the third drink. Can you
Hmm.
tell us a little bit about this one?
Yeah, this is a great diagram that is going to show us what a one standard drink looks like. So all of these are equal across the board depending on the kind of alcohol that one would use. So for example, a 12 fluid ounce regular beer is equal to 8.9 fluid ounces of this malt liquor, which is also five, like you get it, it's all the same drink.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm doing assessments and I'll ask someone to try to gauge how much they're drinking, I would ask them, how much would you have in one sitting? And they'll say, oh, I'll just have one or two. But really, when you break it down, if someone is having a tall boy, we'll just use that terminology, which is a 24-ounce beer, that is actually two drinks at a time. Just because it's in one can, that don't mean it's just one drink, okay? So if you're
It's
drinking
like
a
the
tall boy,
tall Red Bull compared to the baby Red Bull.
exactly. We got to think about that input what we're putting in our body. So if someone said, like, I have people that will take, like, have a tall boy and then a couple shots of their favorite alcohol. So then you've had probably like six drinks already within an hour. You know what I'm saying? It takes like an hour for a drink to metabolize usually. That is one drink to metabolize.
Right.
You are putting down so much. So it's really a great educational tool. You sharing these things here for people to kind of really put in perspective what a real drink looks like. And for us to kind of have this information, the red flags, if you will, or just clues to look at, like how much are you really drinking? How long are you pouring that glass of wine? How big is it? That is important.
I don't know if you've seen it, but they have this new glass
Mm-hmm.
that's like a ginormous wine glass.
Mm-hmm.
And my kids thought it'd be funny to get it for me. And
Oh,
I'm like, I don't even drink that much to
right.
even have a big wine glass, but it's about the size of a basketball.
Oh my gosh.
And they're selling it
Like
now.
two bottles of wine.
So I just put my change in it because I don't need to be, yeah, that drunk. There's no reason to have that much alcohol in your system.
Yep. Yep. You don't need all that.
But for more people, they
Mhm.
know when their cutoff limit is. But when you're around your peers, you know your
Mhm.
cutoff limit.
Yep.
But they're drinking too. So
Mhm.
we all need to be aware of peer pressure because
Yeah.
peer pressure can get you to a point that you don't want to be in.
Yeah, it does not. There's a couple points here that I want to bring up. Peer pressure, good point. It does not stop because we're not 16 anymore. Like that's not a thing. And then second of all, with the amount that we would drink and the way that it inhibits our frontal lobe, which is where we can make logic and reason and think and stuff. Like ain't nobody thinking about nothing when you're drunk. So your limits that you know of, I know I'm only gonna have two shots or whatever, but you're not making logical decisions at that point. If you are, starting to feel a little tipsy, you're like, oh, I can do one more because your inhibitions are down. So at that point, it's kind of null and void. So those are good points.
Oops, sorry.
Oh, you're good.
When our tendency is to reflect and when nostalgia colors are all of our recollections,
Mm-hmm.
it can also set you up for a drug relapse.
Mm-hmm.
You might find yourself yearning for the simplicity of the days when you would turn to your substance of choice to deal with distressing feelings and make everything seem better,
Mm-hmm.
at least temporarily, because it does come back.
Mm-hmm.
How would you make it through the holidays without being overwhelmed by intense and distressing emotions that impact your recovery? How
Um,
does a person do that?
yeah, it's ongoing work. It is. It's back to what we were kind of talking about earlier about knowing your triggers, down to how do you feel inside to those external triggers as well. Knowing your boundaries and preparing for them, and practice doing it. Practice saying no in the mirror. So, I mean, we know that, I mean, there's so many layers here. We can talk about addiction forever, especially as it relates to the intersectionality with trauma and depression, anxiety, and all the things. Um, there are times when I've met people who are in recovery and they're just not used to saying no. because they're also survivors of trauma, and saying no is just not a thing, to use your voice. So literally sometimes it's okay, your homework is to go home and practice saying no in the mirror. Just say it. Just feel how it rolls off your tongue. Like come back and tell me about that experience, what comes up for you. Doing things like having support, whether it's a therapist or a peer support group, so your AA and NA meetings, um, increasing healthy coping skills. Because the one thing that I would always say to someone working in recovery or really changing any habit is that if we're going to talk about taking something away, like this holiday season, you're trying to prepare, and you're just your first time really gung ho, like I'm not going to use anything. If we're going to take something away, we also have to be fair to the withdrawal member, right, in our brains, because your brain, your body's going to be like, where is my gin? Then you also have to give yourself something. So you can't just deprive yourself and expect yourself to be okay. So how are you going to manage that withdrawal? So for a lot of people, it takes some time. Again, it's trial and error. I want to replace it with sex, or I want to replace it with eating or binging something, right? Netflix even. So what is it that you're going to need so that you feel a semblance of what the alcohol gives you, which, part of the functional analysis that I'm talking about, only one piece of that is looking at triggers, but it's also looking at those short term consequences. We have to look at what the drugs and alcohol are giving you. So in treatment with me, I'm going to ask someone like, so what do you get out of using crack? Like, let's just talk about it. What do you like about it? So that we can have something to go by when we're talking about increasing healthy coping skills and really trying to deal with being overwhelmed, um, because we know that it serves a purpose. It may not have the healthiest reaction or purpose for your body, but there's a reason why people would do any unhealthy thing they're doing. So what are you going to give yourself in place of? Give yourself that grace during the time.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And for most people, we shop around for cars, we shop around for houses,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also best to shop around to see if your counselor or your mentor or the group that you're going to actually fits you.
Exactly.
So if you're going to shop for shoes, or you're going to shop for that brand new truck that's half off because it's Christmas, please take care of yourself and shop for your counselor, your psychotherapist, if you will. Can you tell us what the difference between inpatient and outpatient treatment?
Yes. Inpatient treatment is where someone would go and live at a facility that is meant to offer like a bubble, if you will, of treatment at all times. So for the most part, that would include like your bed, your place to stay. You'd have individual therapy, you'd have group therapy, pretty much around the clock, access to medical staff. So if there's a detox program that's in the inpatient center, then they're going to start you there and have access to other drugs that would help kind of manage the withdrawal, all the way down to going to your groups in the morning, then your peer groups, then your therapeutic groups. Like, it's depending on how intense the program is. And for inpatient, if you're doing an inpatient stay for AOD recovery, then it's going to be just that intense. So if, let's say that I had someone, I worked at a level like 2-ish center at Lorettac. So because they offer detox where someone would stay maybe 10 to 14 days. And then we would do a step down process. So if you're coming from outpatient, then they would come in inpatient treatment. Then they would come to me at Lorettac, or us, the staff there. We would be considered an outpatient treatment program where you could go home. So they would come and do like IOP, intensive outpatient, which means that they're just getting out of inpatient treatment, or they're not quite ready for inpatient treatment, but their use is pretty severe. So those groups would still be pretty frequent. So you'd have 3-hour groups 3 days a week for a while. They would check in with your treatment plan. We look at your drug screens. But the main difference is that you get to go home. But in both settings, you would have access to medical care, because we could either make a referral out at an outpatient center, or some outpatient centers have medical staff there, but you're always going to be linked with a professional and have that therapeutic space and that peer support.
And I noticed we're using the word, you got to do your homework. You got to do your homework.
Yeah.
What is doing your homework look like? Because everybody may be, well, let me change that. People may be in school, or they might not be in school. So why would I want to do my homework? Because school happened like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So why would a therapist want me to do homework?
You got to reinforce the skills. You got to. Because Christian ain't finna go home with you and do your work for you. Like, you have to be able to feel it and go through the motions. It's like muscle memory. So how else did we learn long division? We had to go home and practice.
Yep.
So how are you going to manage your triggers? You're going to start saying no and setting your boundaries. And so for my clients, regardless of whatever their issue is they're coming with, I'm that therapist that assigns homework. So if anybody's looking for treatment, just know I'm going to assign worksheets. We're going to talk about it. And even if you don't do it at home and you come in and you don't have your homework, it's not a punitive thing for me if you come and your worksheet's not done, your journaling prompt is not done, because I'm not in the business of shaming people. But we're going to talk about why you didn't do it, because we got to get into that mode of like, is this a self-worth issue? Like, you don't think you deserve to actually have change, or you don't believe that. Like, it gives us a clue really when you don't do the work to kind of have a conversation about deeper stuck points or issues that are barriers to your progress in treatment. The short answer is it's so important to reinforce and practice things, because we don't have a magic wand. So you got to do your work.
Thank you. And we're going to watch a 1-minute video that I hope that the people, if you need help, you'll look at the video and you'll ask for help after. Hold on 1 second.
You feel so hopeless. Then one day you realize,
Unless they've been through it, how can they understand?
I don't need this.
No one's going to judge you.
Suddenly everything was turned around because they insist that I just try.
All it took was someone who would just
Listen.
So you might have to be that person on the other end, listening to what they have to go through or what they've done. But they just might need to talk. Sometimes talking it out and talking what you've been through actually helps you get through it. Not necessarily all the time does somebody need to go talk to a therapist or a group about their trauma or their recovery. If they're in recovery, they might want people to know they're in recovery so they can stop getting called the crackhead down the street.
Right.
So just be aware of that. How does a person maintain recovery, in your opinion?
It is going back. I hate to sound like a broken record, but it's ongoing work. So, but I think one thing I haven't mentioned yet is that acceptance piece. So I listen to a meditation every once in a while by Sheila Marie. It's called the Meditation Mixtape, and she has just different tracks. They're like a couple minutes each, and it'll say one of them is called acceptance. And what she says is that acceptance doesn't mean that we have to put a judgment on it. It's not good, it's not bad, it's not so good. It just is what it is, because once we can accept those things, then we know what the next move is. And so one of the famous prayers or sayings in like your peer-led groups is the serenity prayer. And it says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change. And so that's the first piece of it. You have to accept it to kind of know what you need to say, or what your next move needs to be. And so if you are at peace, the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, then that's the first steps. I'm at peace knowing that I don't have to know everything. I can find somebody to help me kind of talk it out, like you said earlier. So really maintaining recovery is those active steps toward making a change, and knowing that if you do have a reoccurrence, what did you learn this time? There's something that we call the stages of change, or we allude to in addictions counseling. And the first step is pre-contemplation, which is denial, all the way up to action steps and maintenance. And so what we tell people is You've been using for 30 years. Ain't no 6 months of therapy gonna stop you from using anything, you know? So it's really important for you to kind of know you're gonna probably swing through those stages in between, but every time you are going back and trying, that is maintenance because you are actively working towards that goal of, at the very least, reducing your use and just kind of seeing where it goes from there.
And I have been reading a book,
Hmm.
and it's called Don't Quit in the Dip.
Don't quit
And
in a dip.
yep.
Okay.
So it tells you that when you're in the valley, don't stop what you're doing just because you're in the valley. Yes, you're in the valley. You're
Mhm.
gonna get out the valley, but
Mhm.
don't stop with your self-improvement when you were up here and now you're in the valley and it feels a little different, and the road may be a little shaky,
Mhm.
but you're gonna get out of that dip.
Yeah.
So don't quit the good things and go fall back on the bad things just because you're in the dip.
Yep. And that dip
So
is not who you are. So.
it's not.
Mhm.
Everybody has a purpose, and not necessarily are we walking in our purpose. But to get through the journey, we
Mhm.
might have some going left and going right. But once we get back on the right journey, prayerfully, everything will work.
Yep. All we can do is try. That's accepting. That's like another thing in staple in AA. I'm just accepting that this is a thing. Like,
It
I'm
is what it
Christian,
is.
I'm an addict. Now let's get it. Like, what are we gonna do about this? Because you can't change if you're not trying to ex- know where you are. Like, you have to know where you're starting. So that's a good point.
So here on the screen are some resources. If you have your phone handy, I ask that if you would like, you can take snapshots of our resources. That way you can put them in your phone and use them, share them if you want.
Mhm.
We did record this episode of Mental Health Matters, so it will be on YouTube and Facebook.
Mhm. Cool.
And if you know anybody that's dealing with alcohol or narcotics, we do have the resources on the screen for Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous.
Mhm. And they're all free, by the way.
Yes, they're all free. And also for those who think, oh, I can't use it because I'm going to lose my job. I can't use it because I have a perception
Mhm.
and it cannot be messed with. Most of the time, you hear that from military members,
Mhm.
law enforcement, fire and EMS. Here are the numbers that you can call, and nobody has to know about it.
Mhm.
Everything's confidential.
Yeah. And even if you were to come to me or anyone like someone like me in private practice, we are bound by law to keep that confidential anyway. So that anonymous piece is really big for a lot of people, but just across the board, that's really important to know.
So if you've enjoyed this, we ask that you use the link in the chat. My producer, Barbara, will put the link in the chat. And we ask that you answer a couple questions, whether this was beneficial, whether you'd like to see more of these. Just tell us if we did bad, good, or indifferent. Tell the good, or bad, and ugly. I'm all for it. My
Yeah.
supervisor reads them, I read them, and we make changes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we do have we have 2 webinars in January, and they're self-care classes in January. We ask that you use the link
Mm-hmm.
available in the chat to register for that. That class is also free of charge. And we make it available, and it's fun. And we also give you a workbook so you can start your beginning of the year plan.
Ooh.
And remember, a plan is just that. You can go back, change it, make it look better, change it again, and it's still a plan. It's a workable, adjustable plan.
Yep.
So without further ado, these are our sponsors. We want to thank you for coming out and being here with myself and Kristen and Barbara. We had fun.
Yes.
And we hope to see you again. Remember to check SC Thrive out at 1-800-726-8774. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Have a good day.
Bye. Thank you, guys.